I will be reading from Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the power of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens.
So, before your way out this morning, go out this door and look at the sheets and see what you can volunteer to do, because that is a big effort. That is something we do to the outreach of our community and the service of our young people. So please take a look at that before your way out, because this place is going to look a whole lot different by the next time I get to preach in 2 weeks. We just celebrated the 4th of July. Hopefully you guys all had a really good holiday. I know I did. Me and Delaney were on vacation for the 4th. But on top of all the fireworks and all the enjoyable festivities that we get to do, hopefully you took some time to be thankful for all the freedoms that we have in this land, thankful for the men and the women who have fought for those freedoms. And there's many of you here this morning who are our veterans, and I'm very grateful to you for the services you've provided, the sacrifices you've made for other people. And one person was especially on my heart this last holiday, and that's my little brother, Harley. Harley was actually born here at this congregation. People don't remember him as much because we moved about 4 or 5 months later. But Harley was born here, raised an Indiana farm kid, and after graduating high school in 2015, he immediately went up and joined the Marines, like Logan, who's actually here today, calling him out. I didn't know he was here. But yeah, he went off to the Marines. That was about 4 years ago now. In fact, most of you know that if you join the military, you usually sign about a 4-year contract. Harley's contract is actually supposed to be up in about 3 weeks, I think it was, and he would have been coming home. But instead of doing that, he's actually just signed a 2-year extension to join a group of Marines and sailors to spend an extra 9 months in the Middle East. In fact, this morning, it's not morning where he's at, but this morning he's sitting on an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, about 20 minutes off the west coast of Iran, just prepared and waiting if there ever becomes a threat. I think about that, and I think about the services he's done. I think about where he's at this morning, and I can't ever imagine what it would be like to be in his shoes, right? To know that you could be thrust into battle any moment. To know that just 10 minutes to your east is an enemy who would just love to do you harm. Or even to look around at your fellow soldiers and to think that you might be relying on these people around you for saving your life any moment now. And while I'll never exactly know what that's like, I also fully believe that you and that I are going through something very similar this morning. Because brothers and sisters, there is a battle going on around us this morning. There is an enemy who would love to bring you down. There are advocates who are fighting for you on God's side, and ignoring the battle is just not an option that we have. And I thought about using my brother as an example. I kind of thought about starting the sermon this way, and I was worried. I was like, some people are going to complain that I'm belittling the role of a soldier by comparing that to spiritual warfare. But no, that's not what it is. I in no way take what our soldiers do lightly at all. And that's exactly why I make this big comparison. Not to drag down the experience of a soldier, but instead to elevate the seriousness of the reality of our spiritual warfare. I think part of us accepts that, right? Part of us accepts that we are fighting a real spiritual war and that that's going on. Those of us who are raised in a church, like we grew up saying, I'm in the Lord's army, right? Yes, sir. We grew up doing that. But at the same time, now that we've gotten a little bit older, if you're anything like me at least, you've tuned it out. You've kind of forgotten that that's a part of your reality. You've kind of put those blinders on a little bit. Or maybe you've even gone a step further. I wouldn't be surprised to know that there are people here this morning who, though they might not admit it, kind of think that the whole angels, the whole demon things is just an extra part of superstition, more or less. And in a postmodern, post-enlightenment world that we live in, that's not that surprising. We don't jump into the spiritual, we don't jump into the supernatural very easily. But I think that even the most particular scientists understand that there is much more going beyond what we can even see or understand. You have things like string theory, you have things like quantum physics, which, hey, that's way beyond my mind. I have no idea. I'm not going to try to even dive in that. I just understand it barely enough to know that there is an agreement that there are studies going on, that there are things going on beyond what we can see and beyond what we have attributed to natural order our entire lives. And that's just a small example for somebody who might want to argue that, oh, we can't see them, they're not real. I think there's science there that would argue with that. But for those of us who accept the Bible as truth, there really shouldn't be much of a question there to that at all, right? The Bible tells us that there are things going on beyond what we can see. The Bible tells us that this is real. The Bible tells us that this is going on. It even warns us a little bit. It even warns us about what's going on in the spiritual realm, things that are going on for us and things that are going on against us. And I've yet to find something that the Bible warns us about that wasn't actually true, right? Every other thing in the Bible, if it warns me about it, it at least exists, right? So why would this be any different? And this isn't some distant battle that's going on in heaven. Like, we got a picture. I think if you looked on the internet, there would be tons of pictures. In fact, trying to find this image, I found tons of pictures of these angels and demons kind of fighting in the clouds. But it's not this far away, irrelevant thing. It's active in our world right now. And I truly believe this. If you allow me to get boring for just like 30 seconds, okay? There, in the 1500s, there was this individual, this philosopher named Descartes. And he put forth this idea of dualism. This idea that there's the physical and that there's like the mental, spiritual, intangible, and that those things are separate and they don't touch and they don't mix. And that thought process has underlined our just normal life for centuries now. But when I phrase it out that way, I don't think the Bible actually advocates for this idea. Instead, I like the other idea, sticking with old thought processes. You got Descartes and dualism. I like the idea of the ancient Celtic view of thin places. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but the ancient Celtic world, they had this idea that there were areas, there was moments, there were spaces where the spiritual world and the physical world were so close, and that place was so thin that you could just almost feel it. And I don't really think the Celtics at that time really knew what they were going with, but at the same time, I think that is a lot closer to what the Bible is having to say. The spiritual world and the physical world that you see about you, they're not happening separately from each other. Amen. There are spiritual friends and there are spiritual foes that share our world with us this morning. So let me share with you my favorite biblical example that I think kind of expounds upon this and shows us a little bit. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, go ahead and turn to 2 Kings chapter 6. We'll start in verse 15 there. So 2 Kings 6, 15. And I'll give you a little bit of backstory as you guys are flipping over. The kingdom, the nation of Aram, and the nation of Israel are at war with each other. So the king of the Arameans, he's setting these traps for the king of Israel, okay? And so he finds out where the king of Israel is, he sets a trap, and then all of a sudden the king of Israel is gone. By the time he set it and it's laid and ready to go, the king of Israel is gone. And so he finds out where the king of Israel is again, and he goes and he lays the trap, but then by the time it's ready, the king of Israel is gone. And this happens over and over and over again. And so the king of the Arameans, he pulls together his council, and he's like, okay, what's going on? One of you guys has to be a spy. One of you guys has to be a mole. There's no way this is happening over and over again. And his counsel looks at him and he's like, no, it's not us. There's a prophet of God in Israel. And whenever you're planning these things against the king, God speaks to the prophet, and the prophet shares it with the king, and he's able to avoid your traps. So the king of the Arameans, he takes that, and he decides, okay, well, let's go kill the prophet. Now, in my mind, there's a little bit of a logical flaw there, right? If you can't kill the king because the prophet keeps telling him, I don't know why you think you'd be able to kill the prophet. But that's kind of where we pick up right here in 2 Kings 6 and 15. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the eyes of the servant, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. We may not see it. We may not initially see it, but there are forces for God all around us. And while that thought might raise some hairs on the back of our neck, and I'm sure it will if you seriously consider that, it's not something to be scared of. That's something to have joy in. That's something to rejoice in and have confidence in. I love this line. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. That is a great line. Write that on a Post-it note and stick it on your steering wheel. Read that thing 5 times a day. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. That is good news. What a great reminder of the power of God and the fact that he provides for us and that he protects us. And these beings from God, they're powerful. You know, if you didn't get that hint by the fact that they're covered in fire, which is usually a giveaway, if you haven't realized that yet, they're very, very powerful. Right? There's another story in 2 Kings, literally just a few chapters later. I believe it's chapter 19. But there's an angel of God who comes in, and overnight, he kills 185,000 enemies of Israel. Overnight, he kills 185,000 people. Talk about being touched by an angel, right? You know, that might not always be a good thing. But I take a lot of comfort. And I hope you do too, knowing that I fight on the side of God, and I fight on the side of God angels, and that in a moment of need, there could be hillsides full of fiery chariots and soldiers on God's behalf fighting for me. I take a lot of comfort in that, take a lot of joy in that. But with that being said, there is another side. There's always another side, right? There are forces out there that want to do us harm. I'm sure you've read plenty of stories in the New Testament and the Gospels about Jesus and his disciples healing demon-possessed people, and those are good examples. But this morning I want us to look at another Old Testament example, one that I think that gives us a little bit more insight on the actual battle that happens beyond what we can see. So if you're following along with your Bibles, we're going to flip over to Daniel chapter 10, starting in verse 2. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat, or touched wine to my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Upaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face was like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. Just notice this. How many times did he say like? It's like a teenager in the 90s, right? It says like so many times here because there are no earthly words to describe what these heavenly realms are. You see it all the time in Revelation. We don't have the language to describe the beauty and the glory of what goes on beyond what we can see on a regular basis. So you use the word like a lot. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it. But such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at the great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground, more or less passes out of just the sheer overwhelmingness of what he sees. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up, trembling. Then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard. And I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief priests, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future for the visions concerning a time yet to come. There are evil forces out there. And they're doing their best, as you see here, to fight against God's forces for good. And while I don't want to scare anybody, I don't appreciate preachers who come up and try to scare people into action. I think that's cheap preaching, and that's not what I'm about. So I don't mean to scare anybody here, but I think that this is very real, and it needs to be addressed, and we need to recognize that. How many of you guys like scary movies? Okay, a few people, and then probably about 20 others who don't want to raise their hand. It's too early in the morning. Yeah, I mean, I like a good scary movie every now and then. Aliens, monsters, murder mystery, right? Like, I enjoy that. Delaney and I are about halfway through the new season of Stranger Things. Working on that, really enjoy it. But when it comes to movies that involve demons, I don't do that. I don't do that. That stuff is just too real to be playing around with, if you ask me. And there is no way that I'm willing to give those beings any undeserved invitation into my mind or any space in my head to think about. So even though these things, they're scary and they're real, remember, those that are for us are more than those that are for them. We can walk around unafraid because we know that our God is greater, right? We know that our God is stronger. We've been told the end of the story, and it turns out God wins. So we don't have to worry about these things that are out there. You know, we can rejoice knowing the enemy cannot get to us when we've fortified ourselves with God. When we've put ourselves in his hand, they have no more access. We are protected and fortified by God. And that is good news for us here this morning. Sadly, though, I think sometimes we make it easy on the enemy. Have you ever made it easy on the enemy? I know I have. Instead of making them fight for us, sometimes we willingly go over to them. I think you look at the ancient world. The ancient world is saturated with these pagan gods that demand sacrifices of these horrible kinds, that make these false promises, and are just all around. They're bad news. You know, I think many times we shrug off these idols because we see them as just non-existing, powerless pieces of just material, whether that's gold or metal. They're just a big hunk of stuff. And I get that, and I think there's truth to that. You know, a golden calf statue is just a statue. It can't do anything to me, right? Nothing to worry about. Well, I think it might be a little bit more than that. You know, I'm not saying these are gods in any way. Don't get me wrong. But I think there might be a little bit more there. I think there are dark forces that reside behind some of those ancient pagan gods. Read with me real quick, 1 Corinthians 10. This is Paul talking. Consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? Do I mean that food sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. But the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God. And I do not want you to be participating with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. Are we trying to rouse the Lord's jealousy? Are we stronger than he? Paul tells us here, you know, these idols, are they anything? No, they're not. They're just big pieces of metal. But at the same time, sacrifices made to them, worship made to them, is being made to demons. And just look at the pagan gods of the nations that surrounded Israel, right? When Israel moved into Canaan, there's all these other nations around. They all have their own gods. Just look at these different gods, these nations, and try to tell me that they're not dark forces behind there. You have Baal. Baal is a god of wealth and greed. And that doesn't bother us too much, right? We're in a fairly wealthy country, and that's not necessarily a wrong thing. But have you ever found someone who just fully idolized their wealth or their money? Were they happy? Were they living a full and abundant life? I don't think so. You have Ashtoreth, who is the god of sex. You can imagine why she was more popular back in those days. And then you have Molech, god of old age. And I think Molech might be the worst of this group. Molech is scary to me. And I almost put up a picture here, a picture of some of the Molech idols, but I decided against it. So the Molech statue it would be sitting down, or sometimes it would just be half a body and be standing there. It usually had like a calf head, and its arms would be extended like this, all right? And then it would have a big hollow belly. It's made of iron or gold, and in this hollow belly, you would put wood and you'd start a fire. And like all metal, when you start a fire around it, it heats up, it heats up, it heats up, and it gets hotter and hotter. And then when the statue was just burning hot, red ablaze, you would place a live baby in its hands as a sacrifice. Burn it alive. You can't tell me, you can't convince me at least, demons aren't behind this, that there aren't demons in this world. And some would say, well, then where are they today, right? Maybe they were there in the Old Testament, maybe they were active in biblical times, but they're not around today. They're gone. Please don't fool yourself into thinking that there aren't forces like that in our world anymore, that they've gone away. They're still active. Some of you may remember, but I got the opportunity 2 Januaries ago, January 2018, to join some family members in a mission trip to Haiti. And while I was there in Haiti, I met this young girl named Jocelyn, just this cute little girl who lived in the mission house, used to be in part of the orphanage. You know, she was, I don't know what happened to her mother, but when she was a baby, she was orphaned. And as an orphan, as a vulnerable baby, she was given over to a voodoo priest who was preparing to burn her alive as a sacrifice before the missionary stepped in and rescued her. Don't tell me demons don't exist. The powers behind Molech are still alive in this world. You know, well, and then the question becomes, okay, fine, well, maybe they're in some third world countries where they have more access, but they're not in America. We don't see them in America. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. What's sad is they don't even have to hide behind fake masks. They don't even have to hide behind scary names. You know why? Because we already worship money. We already worship sex. We already live in a culture where it's acceptable, and some people even advocate killing babies. And that's not to condemn anybody who's made a wrong decision in their life. There's still healing. There's still grace there. But we live in a culture where it's acceptable. If that doesn't convince you that there's a spiritual war going on in our world today, I don't know what will. And these are just a few biblical examples we've looked at this morning. There's so much more that could be said about this issue. I mean, I can't help myself, just a small list more. You got in Jude, you talk about Michael fighting Satan for Moses' body, Michael being an angel. Genesis 18 and 19, angels, they go to check out Sodom and Gomorrah, which I think is really neat. They come to Abraham, they're like, hey, we've heard the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. These victims, they've been praying to God that they've been hurt by the people in this town, and we're going to go check it out. They, in person, go to check out the sins and the things that are wrong with Sodom and Gomorrah before passing a judgment there. Mark 9, you see Jesus, the disciples, they can't heal a demon-possessed man, and Jesus comes along and heals it, and he says, oh, this type can only be healed by prayer and fasting. Type? There's different kinds? There is, but we don't have time for that today. Hebrews 13 is a popular verse, talks about people showing hospitality to angels without even knowing it. That's an interesting concept. Let me advocate that you don't go try to do that. I don't think angels are interested in being your friend, okay? You know, whenever you see angels interacting in the Bible, they're not there to have a bond with a person. They're there to point them to God. Angels not there for you to like have an interesting story to tell. If they're doing something, they're trying to get you directed to God. If there's a spiritual force that wants to get buddy-buddy with you, not from God. Avoid that. 1 Peter 5 and 8 talks about the devil prowling around like a lion. Man, isn't that a scary thought? That he's there, that he's stalking you, he's learning, he's planning, waiting to make the right attack. Peter wrote this. Peter knows that. You remember before the crucifixion, Jesus told Peter, hey, Satan's asked to sift you like grain. He experienced that firsthand. And then, of course, our Bible reading today, I appreciate Adam reading that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil. There is a war going on around us, whether we acknowledge it or not. And this battle is happening for us. It's happening around us. In some ways, it's happening against us. And the forces that are participating in this battle, they're much stronger than you. They're much stronger than I. But that doesn't mean we get to sit out. That doesn't mean we get to sit out. You know, remember our story with Daniel that we just read a second ago? Daniel, he was praying, and it's his praying that moves these angelic beings to action. And it's that action that causes this battle to ensue. Daniel was causing waves in the spiritual realm without even knowing it by his actions. And then without even knowing what was going on, he continues to pray. He continues to fast for 3 weeks. 3 weeks seeking an answer. And I just kind of wonder a bit, what would have happened if Daniel stopped praying? after week 1? What would have happened if you quit praying after week 2? Would the ending have been the same? I don't know. But what I do know is that our actions, they make a difference in this war. And it's time that we all pick up a sword and join the battle. Ephesians 6:10 and on shows us exactly what we need to equip ourselves to be ready to fight in this battle. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you will be able to stand your ground and offer you have done everything to stand. Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. God has given us tools to equip us for our fight. And my dad used to tell me, growing up, he told me multiple times, that when he was growing up, that there was a battle for his soul. You know, I think he did a lot of good things, and he did a lot of bad things. And he always told me and my brothers that there was a battle for his soul. Anthony, my uncle over there, could probably affirm that too. You might have had a battle for your soul. I won't say I don't know. But he always told us, he was like, there was people tugging from one side and there was people tugging on the other. And it was going to one side or the other. It was going to be extreme. And later in life, as a minister, he was guest preaching at a congregation. And after he got done preaching, he was just kind of meeting some of the people in the congregation. And he saw his old church camp counselor. And I was like, oh, I didn't know you went to church here. He's like, I don't. I was driving by and saw your name on the church sign and thought, there's no way Mitchell Haynes from Camp Indian is a preacher now. You know, there was a battle for his soul. And thanks to the grace of God and thanks to the actions of people willing to fight in that battle for him, God won. He's a minister today because of that. I'm a minister today because of that. The question is, who are you going to let win today? There is a battle. There is a battle. And we have to make a decision whether we're going to cower behind a rock or if we're going to pick up a sword and join the fight. If you're not a Christian this morning, and yet you've decided it's time to pick a side, it's time to fight with God, let me just tell you right now, there would be no bigger blow you could send the enemy than being baptized into Christ today. Amen. If that is you, won't you come as we stand and sing?
Intercedes for you. Lift up your voice.